Hello and good morning. It's another beautiful Tuesday. Welcome to the Maiden edition of this novel initiative, Jurisprudential Tuesday. Jurisprudential Tuesday is a program which seeks to educate, analyze, and address issues from the legal perspective. Jurisprudential Tuesday is brought to you by the Faculty of Law, Uniuyo Law Media. I am Odinaka Chuku Ihanacho, your host on this program. It's 1 month, 1 week, and some days since the presidential election was held, and the Senator Bola Ahmed Tinubu of the APC was declared the president-elect by INEC. But it's now becoming a norm for people to seek redress in court, and this year's selection process is not far different from what we have been obtaining in the past. One of the major bones of contention in this year's election is the issue of 25% FCT votes, which has led to several legal and political views. On today's edition of Jurisprudential Tuesday, we will be focusing on the 25% FCT votes and other constitutional matters. And on our hot seat today to address this issue is Dr. Ekokoi Solomon. And Dr. Ekokoi Solomon is a barrister and solicitor of the Supreme Court of Nigeria. He holds a PhD in law from the Faculty of Law, University of Calabar, Nigeria. Dr. Solomon Ekokoi is a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Law, University of Uyo, where he is currently the coordinator of the postgraduate programs. He engages in legal and policy relevant research in the areas of comparative constitutional law, revenue and development laws, and clinical legal education. He has published several papers in reputable national and international peer-reviewed journals and books. He is the author of the book Nigeria's Sovereign Wealth Fund, Legal and Institutional Issues, which was published in 2021. Dr. Ekokoi Solomon, it's good to have you on the Maiden edition of Jurisprudential Tuesday.
Thank you for having me.
There's a lot of people would say that it's the time or the season for constitutional lawyers to be smiling. I don't know. Do you also agree with that? With the current legal issues happening in the country today, that it's the season for constitutional lawyers.
Actually, you are correct because the issues involved, especially in this election cycle, has to do with constitutional law. The major issues revolve around constitutional law, and to find a final resolution to the issues, one has to be vested with the issues or the constitutional provisions of the 1999 Constitution.
Okay, so now let's get to the nitty-gritty of the matter, because lots of views arose from the petition that was filed by the two other leading candidates, which one is based on section 134 of the Constitution, which talks about FCT votes. I want to ask if you actually know the intention of the drafters of this Constitution. Were they trying to make FCT a hurdle for the politicians to cross, or were they trying to give recognition to FCT as a state?
Well, actually, there's an ongoing debate with regards to the provisions of section 134, subsection 2 of the 1999 Constitution. That provision is to the effect that before a candidate who stood for election in the presidential election can be declared the winner of the election, first and foremost, he has to have scored the highest vote amongst the candidates. That is, if there were more than 2 candidates standing for the election, in which, in this case, there were 18 candidates, 18 presidential candidates who stood for the presidential election. So section 134, subsection 2 is relevant to the issues on ground at the moment. So the candidate has to first and foremost score the highest vote at that presidential election. Secondly, the candidate must also record 1/4, that is 25%, in 2/3, which amounts, of course, if we use 36 states, The two-thirds will give you something around 24, and then adding the Federal Capital Territory, that will be amounting to 24.6, which, of course, the court will have to decide whether a state can be segmented, as was the case in the Lucas Classicals of Awolowo versus Shagari in 1979, when the issue arose. Even though it was not exactly what we have today, because at the time the FCT was not in the mix. But under the 1999 Constitution, the FCT is part of the requirement of before a candidate can be declared election. But the argument is this: whether under that section 134 subsection 2, whether the two-thirds states includes the FCT, or the FCT is a mandatory state to be won before a person can be declared president, having won the majority vote, which is the first leg of the requirement. Now, there is a school of thought that believes, which is being led by the famous Mike Uzogome, SAN. He has written several masterpieces giving us why we should believe that the FCT is a must win for any candidate to be declared winner. He has even gone further to use a mathematical calculation using board mass. For those of us who did mathematics, who understand what board mass stands for. Now it's a formula using mathematical arrangements to come to a conclude to an answer. So Ozakeme SN has applied board mass to say that FCT is a must win for any candidate to be declared winner at the presidential election. But there is another school of thought that believes that the FCT is like any other territory within the federation, and that once the candidate scores the mandatory one quarter, that is 25%, in two-thirds of the territories that make up the federation, which of course we have 36 states plus the Federal Capital Territory, making 37 territories put together, then the person would have been lawfully elected. Now, I belong to the second school of thought.
Just hold your thought. When you say it's a must win, does it mean that there's a special recognition for FCT?
I'm coming to that. The first school of thought believes that the FCT is a must win for a candidate to be declared winner of that election, presidential election. And the second school of thought is of the view that the FCT is not a must win. The FCT is like any other state in the federation, that if you get, once a candidate scores the required one quarter, that is 25%, in two-thirds of the 36 plus, including the Federal Capital Territory, that candidate is lawfully elected. Now, I belong to the second school of thought, that the Federal Capital Territory is not a must win for a candidate to be declared winner. Now, I have 4 reasons for that. The first is that the framers of the Constitution never intended to make FCT votes, or the votes from the FCT at a presidential election, to be more weighted. If you understand what I mean, weighted, to have more weight.
Because a lot of people would say that if the framers of the Constitution had that in mind, maybe they are trying to say that there are more special people in the FCT than in other states.
Trying to give more weight to the votes of a person who resides in the FCT. That is to say, if the first school of thought is correct, that is, FCT is a must win, it will mean that the vote of a person who votes, who lives in the FCT, one vote of a resident of FCT is more valuable, more weighted than a vote from, say, Adamawa.
But do you think it won't be, it isn't fair, because a lot of people believe that Abuja is a no man's land?
No, it would not be fair to give more than, because we are practicing a representative democracy. everybody one man, one vote. So if I have one vote in Uyo, and a person resides in Abuja, and you say his one vote now amounts to more weight than my one vote in Uyo, in Akwa Ibom State, that will be giving advantage to the person, to people living in the FCT. That is the first reason. The framers could not have intended to give FCT the tie, that is as a must win, because if you do that, it will amount to giving the people living in FCT weighted votes compared to people who reside outside the FCT.
Like giving them some special status.
Giving them special status. That's what it will amount to. And the framers never intended that. The framers never intended to give certain persons living within a geographical region more or weighted votes compared to citizens living outside that region. So that is the reason why.
But don't you think that they also, since FCT is not actually a state, so they were trying to recognize
I will come to the second reason. The first reason is what I've just stated. The second reason is that under Section 299 of the Constitution itself provides that the FCT is deemed to be a state within the federation, and that it should be treated that way with regards to the administration of the territory. That is to say, where you have a governor governing a state within the FCT, the president will now act as the governor. Where you have the House of Assembly for a state, with regards to the FCT, the National Assembly will play that role. So that is why the laws made by the National Assembly govern the FCT. The directives given by the president governs the FCT, and in that case, the FCT, the powers of the governor is delegated to the minister, the FCT minister. So the minister acts on behalf of the president because, of course, the president will be too busy to look into the day-to-day activities of the FCT. So for that purpose, he appoints a minister to oversee the FCT on his behalf. So under Section 299 of the Constitution, the FCT is deemed to be a state. And for the purpose of administration, the Constitution recognizes the FCT as a state. And I must add, election is an administrative exercise. It's an administrative exercise because without the election, you will not have people who will get into office and now to make policies for the governance of the country. So elections itself is an administrative process which is run by an administrative agency, the INEC. So for the purpose of making the FCT a state, people will say the FCT, that provision is an administrative provision because you want to be able to govern the FCT so that the FCT can have a kind of a structure, administrative structure to govern the FCT because it is not a state. Now, but Section 299 has come to the rescue to say, okay, since the FCT does not have those administrative structures, the president, the National Assembly will fill in that gap. And for that reason, the FCT will be considered or deemed to be a state within the federation. That is the second reason for my taking the position that the FCT is not a must-win. The provision of Section 134, subsection 2b, is to the effect that the FCT is one of those states, just one of those states. So if a candidate scores 1/4 in 2/3 of the entirety of the federation, which includes the FCT, then that candidate will be declared winner. Now, the third reason why I belong to the second school of thought, that the FCT is not a must-win, is that law is about language. Language is the tool that we use in expressing the law, and in this case, English language. Now, when you look at the provisions of Section 134, subsection 2b, it says in 2/3 of the states and the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. Now, that is where the confusion comes into play. My understanding of that "and" there is including, means including. That is the way that "and," the framers use the "and" there. including the FCT, not separately as in when you say and this, that means that thing is a standalone. No, that is not the way that the provision is used in the word is used in that provision. The and FCT means including the FCT. Because if you use any other interpretation, it will create absurdity, which comes to my fourth reason why.
Okay, so you're looking at the interpretation here from a literal perspective.
You have to put everything together before you come to a conclusion of what the framers of the Constitution intended in section 134 subsection 2b. You must bring everything to play. Now, don't forget, in interpretation of statute, which of course I have not even used that as one of my reasons, but if you understand how statutes are to be interpreted, the first, if a statute, for example, provides for something earlier and the intention is not clear, the subsequent, if there is a subsequent reference to that provision, that same issue, in a subsequent provision of that same statute, the logic is that the latter interpretation will suffice if the latter is clearer than the previous provisions. Now, in this case, section 134, if at all we are now saying we want to use interpretation of statutes, that's the canon of interpretation. You say if section 134 subsection 2b has made provision and said an FCT, and people are not sure what an FCT means. People are saying an FCT means FCT is a separate entity which must be one. Some other people are saying FCT is not a separate entity that must be one. It is including the FCT, which I belong to. Now, section 299, which is a latter provision of the Constitution, has now come to clarify the position, saying the FCT is a state and you should treat it as such. So, if that is the case, by canon of interpretation, the interpretation in section 299 of the Constitution should be able to clarify whatever confusion that section 134 subsection 2b may have created, if at all there is a confusion. So, and then lastly, the reason why I believe that the FCT is not a must win, like some other persons have argued, is that if you create, they have not seen any democracy, any representative democracy where such a provision exists, where a territory is carved out and the requirement is that that territory is a must win for a candidate to be declared election. The last reason is that if that is the case, it will create absurdity. Absurdity in the sense that it means that if a candidate wins even 34 or 35 or 36 states and does not win the FCT, where he has gotten the whole requirement which the Constitution requires, he has won 35 or 36 of the states, but did not win the FCT. And you say because he did not win the FCT, then the votes that have been given to him from 35 or 36 states will not amount to anything. Then because he has lost the FCT, which is so special, then he will not be declared winner. So,
but in reality, we've not actually had any president who has won the whole thing.
But that is what is playing out. Because it means the argument they are putting forward now is that the FCT is a must win, and that because the president-elect did not win the FCT, then he did not lawfully win the election. And INEC ought not to have declared him winner.
But people would want to, if you have an idea that is sellable, then at least where there are mixed people, it should be widely accepted.
Is it only the FCT that we have mixed people? If come to, okay, let's use, since we are using everything that we have in our arsenal.
Because it's the capital.
Since we are using everything we have in our arsenal to determine whether the FCT is a must win, let us use that, the social angle of it. Is Lagos not a no man's land? Is Lagos not a place where every persons from Nigeria and even beyond Nigeria come together to live? The Lagos State even Lagos State is even more encompassing, more diverse.
But we've seen some people driving some ethnic narrative, although that's not our.
Besides that narrative, I understand where they are coming from. But the issue is that Lagos was the first or the second capital from our history of Nigeria, of the modern Nigeria, after Calabar. Lagos became the capital, and everybody assembled in Lagos. Even before Lagos was made a colony, Lagos was a no man's land. Now, yes, but we know people own the place. There are people who are ethnic, who are indigenous to it. There's no place where you won't find indigenous people. Even in the United States, in Australia, in New Zealand, you find indigenous people there before the other people settlers came. Now, what I'm trying to say is that Lagos is even more diverse than Abuja, if we are to use that argument. Because even before the colonial administration started in 1861, effectively, people from Sierra Leone, from Freetown, from the Gold Coast, came to Lagos and settled there, started doing business. Even the first lawyers who settled in Lagos were people from other territories. They were not Nigerians. So these elites gathered in Lagos, assembled Lagos, and made Lagos what Lagos eventually turned out to, a federal capital. Now, federal capital, yes, suggests that people will definitely come from far and wide, from within, from around that country to settle there. We understand that fact. But if we are to look at the diversity of any part of Nigeria, I am of the view that Lagos is more diverse than Abuja.
Okay, I have to give you that time so you also educate, because one of the reasons for this program, for this initiative, is to educate the people, because we have lots of views flying all around, and some of these views are not expertise views. Okay, so now we move to the next issue, because I'm sure that you have really delved into this matter to give more clarifications on this section. Okay, Dr. Ekokoi Solomon, to wrap your thoughts, I would love to ask you this particular question, because the proponents of the 21st of the 25% of FCT are saying that the Constitution in section 134 sub 2 sub B, they would have just said let it be 36 states, just the votes of the 36 states, or even 37. Why they aren't there?
Like I said earlier, in legislative drafting, the framers would have, of course, section 134 sub 2b comes first. So at that point, where that was the first time reference was made to the election requirement to be declared a winner. Now that section says 36 states in the states of the federation and the FCT. Now at that point, FCT is taken, of course, to be FCT because it is not a state. It is FCT, what it is. So the constitution, the framer said that is in the states of the federation and the FCT, Abuja. They are not wrong in doing that, because that is the first provision in respect of qualification to be declared winner at a presidential election. Now, but in the latter provision, which is in section 299, no, 299 is after 134. So getting to 299, the framers now said, look, what we made reference to is a skill in legislative drafting. What we made reference to when we said FCT, don't see it as what we had intended, what we had referred to it as. See it as a state.
Okay, so you're saying that section 299 made clarification.
It clarified that provision of 134, saying, look, for those who will be thinking that we are saying that FCT is a must win, because you are trying to make that and to be disjunctive, to be saying state and, so they are standing separately. Now, for those of you who may be thinking that way, the drafters in 299, which is a subsequent provision, are now saying, look, it is a state. It is a state. Treat it as a state. So that is clarifying. Section 299 is clarifying whatever provisions or intendment that will be read into the provisions of section 134. For those people who are saying and is disjunctive in nature, as used in section 134, subsection 2b. Section 299 is saying no, treat it as a state. So if the Constitution says to 1/4 in 2/3 of the states of the Federation and the FCT, and 299 says FCT is a state. So I don't think there is any other logic than to say the FCT is a state for the purpose of election and it's not an independent or standing alone territory of the Federation. The Federation is a component of the units. So the FCT cannot be standing outside the Federation.
The FCT cannot be standing outside the Federation. You know, if I should allow Dr. Ekokoi Solomon, he's going to give us more. And I don't want to ask him to say his final words because it would also take maybe like more 30 minutes. Thank you, Dr. Solomon Ekokoi, for being the first guest on the Maiden edition of Jurisprudential Tuesday. It's been a privilege learning from your knowledge, gaining from your knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, this is where we wrap up today's edition of Jurisprudential Tuesday. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and subscribe on our YouTube channel. That's all for it. Don't forget to keep a date with us. Next Tuesday will be Jurisprudential Tuesday. Till then, be legal.